Jon Snow stood on the battlements of Winterfell, his cloak pulled tight against the biting wind. Night had nearly fallen, and in the west, the sun's dying rays flickered upon the horizon. He had never thought he would see his home again so soon, and he had certainly never imagined he would do so without his father's guiding presence. His breath caught in his throat at the memory of Lord Eddard Stark's final days, and he gripped the cold stone rampart to steady himself. He was no longer a boy of the Night's Watch, no longer bound to the ancient vows that once had kept him on the other side of the wall. Circumstances, swiftly tilting fortunes, and the call of blood ties had freed him from that destiny. In the moment he had learned of his father's imprisonment and then execution, something in him had changed. Duty to the Watch and honor in black fled from his thoughts like startled ravens. In the grip of heartbreak and anger, he had made a choice as old as time. He would stand with his family. He had parted the wall under the watchful eyes of a handful of black brothers, some sympathetic, some disapproving, and he had gone south, chasing his brothers' banners. Robb Stark, the newly declared king in the north, had accepted him with open arms. The siblings had embraced, tears stinging their eyes. In that moment, they were no longer bastard and trueborn, half-brother and heir. They were simply two sons robbed of a father, two Starks fighting for survival. When Robb had said, "Come with me, Jon," he had spoken in a tone that brooked no refusal, and Jon had followed gladly. His sword hand itched for retribution against those who had sundered their family. Weeks had passed since that fateful reunion. Battles had been fought, alliances forged, blood spilled. And through it all, the northern host had marched under Robb's banner of the Direwolf, with Jon Snow often riding at his brother's side. They had a bond of trust few could match. Robb relied on Jon's cool-headed counsel, learned in part from Maester Luwin and in part from the wise, grave lessons that Ned Stark had imparted to both of them, albeit differently. When the king in the north hesitated, torn between youthful impulse and kingly duty, Jon's clear voice pulled him back onto the right path. When Jon's darker instincts threatened to overtake him, memories of grief, wrath, or the presence of the Targaryen steel hidden in the black scabbard by his side, Robb's unwavering faith in their cause guided him forward with purpose. Now, under the glimmer of the first starlight, Jon turned from the wall. In the courtyard below, men were bustling about, readying the wagons, the horses, the flurry of preparations that followed the late-night council. Robb had decided it was time to move again. It had been essential to recapture Winterfell from the Ironborn who had so treacherously seized it. But now that the seat of the Starks was secure once more, and the Ironborn who had not yielded had paid dearly, Robb looked southward once again. There were still battles to be fought. The Lannisters still sat in King's Landing, no doubt sneering at the wounded North. With the news that Stannis Baratheon had been repelled at the Blackwater, Tywin Lannister's hold on the capital was stronger than ever. If the North meant to win independence, they would have to fight tooth and nail. Jon made his way down the stairs, passing a row of torches that lit the interior. The Great Hall was busy, but as he moved through, men parted for him the way they would for Robb or even for the great Jon himself. He wore no crown, possessed no titles beyond that of a bastard, yet his actions and bearing since joining Robb had earned the respect of lords and common soldiers alike. He was quick to spot cracks in an enemy's formation or holes in the strategy proposed by a more hot-headed bannerman. He refused to watch Northerners make brash decisions. He had called out more than one noble to his face, and in so doing gained trust as a straightforward counselor. There were whispers he was even more like Ned Stark than Robb, for his quiet manner and steady sense of duty. Others whispered that, with a sword in hand, he fought like a demon. He never crowed about his skill, never boasted, but they had all seen it when the lines clashed. He entered an antechamber near the main hall, where Robb stood bent over a large map table, gray eyes flicking from one marker to another. Around him, some of the greatest lords of the North, Roose Bolton, Rickard Karstark, the great Jon Umber, and Galbart Glover, waited with varying degrees of patience. The tension in the room was thick. Robb looked up. "Jon, there you are," he said. His voice carried a calm authority that belied his young age. "We were just speaking of our march south. There's talk of forging new alliances along the Trident. Jon nodded, stepping forward. We'll want to be mindful of timing, he said. If we linger, Tywin's men will regroup. Even the smaller Lannister forces scattered around Harrenhal might cause trouble if we let them. The Great Jon slapped a heavy hand on the table. Aye, the Lannisters are cunning serpents, but we've plenty of steel of our own. Bolton, pale and reserved, inclined his head. Still, we should use our heads. The king in the north must not be drawn into a rash confrontation. Patience can win battles, as can fear. Jon hid his distaste well, for there was something about Roose Bolton's quiet calm that set him on edge. It was a calm that did not speak of compassion, only cold logic. Yet, if the man's counsel was sound, ignoring it would be foolish. He caught Robb's eye and saw that his brother was reading the same thought upon his face. The king in the north turned to the map. We leave at dawn. Our outriders will fan out across the King's Road. Let the Freys know we will be passing near the twins again. We need to secure safe passage. An uneasy silence gripped the room at mention of the Freys. The old Lord Walder Frey was notoriously fickle, a man whose pride and cunning equaled his sense of self-importance. The Freys had joined the northern cause only because Robb had brokered a marriage alliance, promising to wed one of Lord Walder's daughters. But events had changed since then. Robb had crossed the twins once successfully, but that was before he had heard that Winterfell was in danger. He had left the Freys behind to chase after the Ironborn and secure the north. Then, in a twist that might have been orchestrated by the gods themselves, Robb had encountered a lady from the crag, a daughter of a minor Westerland's house, as she tended to the wounded. He had fallen in love, wedding her without first freeing himself from his vow to Lord Walder. Jon had been there that night, after the battle that left Robb feverish and delirious from injury. The woman, whose name was Jane Westerling, had nursed him and robbed him of his heart. Jon had not been able to talk his brother out of the marriage. Honor demanded Robb wed the girl once he had deflowered her, but the vow to Lord Walder was still a problem that threatened the entire alliance with the Freys. Everyone knew Lord Walder's pride would be stung, and his rancor could be dangerously sharp. However, Jon had taken the initiative along with Catelyn Stark, recently released by the northern host from her captivity in Riverrun, where she had initially gone to treat with southern lords, to salvage the alliance. Instead of leaving the broken vow to fester, they had worked to set new terms. Perhaps a different match could be found for another Stark, or some concessions could be made to show the Freys that their interests were still cherished. If need be, Jon had half a mind to marry one of the Frey girls himself. He was a bastard, but even bastards could be used for forging alliances. He did not relish the idea of wedding someone he did not know, but if it kept the North united, he would do it. Robb had been quietly moved by the willingness, yet had not pressed Jon to such a sacrifice. Back in the antechamber, Robb's eyes swept the room. We cannot face the Lannisters and the Freys both. We must be cunning. Lord Walder has summoned me to discuss amends. He keeps his grudges close, they say, but I will not kneel. He'll have to settle for new promises. The Great Jon grinned broadly. I say we go in with 1,000 men behind us and let him see the steel in our hands. That'll shut him up. Jon frowned. That might only inflame him further. We need him to grant us safe passage. Threatening him with a large armed host in his courtyard is precarious. Let us show our strength, but also keep it measured. Rickard Karstark, still nursing the bitter grief of losing 2 sons in Lannister dungeons, stroked his beard. I care little for Lord Walder's pride. If we're forced to fight him, so be it. Robb tapped the table. It won't come to that. Jon's right. We show some measure of courtesy, but we make clear we are not at his mercy. I'll take a reasonable guard. The rest of the army will set camp a safe distance away, but close enough to respond if the Freys prove treacherous. We'll do the same when we meet with them again. He looked to Jon. You'll ride with me, of course. Jon nodded, a coil of anxiety tightening in his belly. He knew too well how a proud old man like Walder Frey might act if he felt disrespected. But they had no choice. The geography of the Trident gave the Freys immense power to hamper or aid the king in the north. And if the North was to strike at the Lannisters effectively, they needed to cross the twins once again. At dawn, they rode out, leaving behind a garrison of dependable men at Winterfell. The fields surrounding the castle were still recovering from the Ironborn's depredations, but the loyal peasants waved as the king in the north passed. Robb had made sure the people of the north knew that he fought for them, not just for his own vengeance. If the war was about independence and survival, the common folk's support was crucial. Jon rode at Robb's right, with Grey Wind padding alongside them. The direwolf's presence emboldened the men. The outriders spread ahead like scouts, making sure there were no hidden threats. As the host moved south along the King's Road, there were hushed conversations about whether the Lannisters would attempt to bring battle to the Riverlands again. There were also rumors about Tywin forging a fresh alliance with House Tyrell, a development that had changed the war's balance of power. Jon was thoughtful. Sometimes he found his mind drifting back to the Wall. He wondered how his old friends fared. Samwell Tarly, PYP, Gren, and the rest. He wondered if they cursed him now for desertion, or if they understood. A pang of guilt sometimes clenched his chest, but then he remembered Ned Stark's face on the steps of the Great September of Baelor, and the guilt turned to cold resolve. He had chosen his family. He had chosen to stand by Robb. If the realms beyond the Wall posed some threat, the kingdoms would have to unite eventually to face it. But the day for that was not yet. Their progress was steady, unchallenged for many days. Scouts reported little activity from the south, though there were signs that Lannister outriders occasionally skirted their path, watching from afar. Robb made the decision to hold formation but press onward swiftly. Sooner or later, they would have to engage Tywin's armies or try to push for an advantage in the Riverlands. Meanwhile, the question of the Freys hung over them. Lord Walder had sent a courteous enough letter, requesting the king in the North's presence at the Twins to discuss the best path forward for all concerned. None in Robb's council believed the old man's invitation was purely innocent, but it was an opening they could not afford to spurn. The vow had been broken, and to leave that wound untended would be to risk a dagger in their backs. Eventually, they made camp not far from the Trident's crossing. The Twins rose in the distance, two austere gray towers looming on opposite sides of the Green Fork, connected by a massive stone bridge that spanned the swirling waters. Pennants bearing the two cross towers of House Frey fluttered in the wind. Robb, Jon, and a small retinue of lords and knights rode forward to treat with the Freys, while the main army established a fortified camp a league away, within easy striking distance if trouble arose. Jon knew tension ran high as they approached the gates. He saw how Robb held his head high, Grey Wind at his stirrup, as if daring the Frey men at arms to bar the way. But the gates opened, and a slender lordling in Frey colors hurried forth to greet them. Jon recognized him as Ser Ryman Frey, one of Lord Walder's many grandsons. The man bowed, though not too deeply. "King Robb," Ser Ryman said, a calculating gleam in his eye. "My grandfather awaits you in the great hall. He is most pleased you have come to mend what was torn." Robb dismounted. "I come in good faith, Ser Ryman. Lead us to him." Ser Ryman's gaze briefly flickered to Jon, who rode just behind the king in the north. Jon met that measuring stare without flinching. Then, unbidden, a vague unease crept up Jon's spine. In a subtle motion, he checked the position of his sword, as if ensuring he could draw it swiftly if need arose. They proceeded inside, passing through a courtyard brimming with Frey men. Jon noted the mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and thinly veiled hostility in their faces. Walder Frey's brood was massive and complicated, with countless branches, stepchildren, grandchildren, bastards, and wards. Only the old Lord Walder knew for certain where each one stood in his web of alliances and favor. In the hall, the high seat of the Freys loomed at the far side. Lord Walder perched there like a shriveled spider. The old man's mouth twisted in a semblance of a smile when Robb entered with his retinue. Jon could feel the tension thrumming in the air, but he kept his shoulders straight, flanking his brother as they advanced to stand before the dais. "Well, well," Lord Walder croaked. "The king in the north graces us again. It's been too long. I was starting to wonder if you remembered your old friends here at the Twins, or if you'd decided the North needed no crossing. But here you stand, though not in quite the same circumstances as before. His gaze slid pointedly over Robb's shoulders, as if seeking the bride he had been promised. I hear you have a Westerling queen now. Quite the news. But I suppose our dear king in the North is free to wed as he pleases. After all, oaths are so easily cast aside. There was a chill in his tone. Robb said nothing at first, carefully schooling his expression. I come to rectify that matter. I will not deny that I broke my vow. Circumstances forced my hand. There is no offense meant to you or your house. No offense, you say? Lord Walder barked a laugh, spittle flecking his lips. You made me a promise, then broke it. My sweet granddaughter was left wanting, humiliated. And you dare say no offense is meant. My father always taught us that honor can be mended, John said quietly, stepping forward. He kept his voice respectful. But only if one is willing to meet in good faith. Walder Frey's rheumy eyes flicked to John. Ah, the bastard, he said, drawing out the word. There was no sympathy or condemnation in his tone, just a cat-like amusement. I hear you ran away from the Night's Watch. And now you stand at your brother's side, a deserter. Interesting company the king in the North keeps these days. John's jaw tightened, but he did not rise to the bait. Beside him, Robb's face was set in stony composure. I come prepared to make amends, the king said, if you will hear what I offer. Lord Walder made a show of leaning forward, cupping an ear. I'm old and half-deaf, my lord. Speak up. Let all in this hall hear you. So Robb recounted the terms. A new marriage alliance, perhaps with Edmure Tully, who was Caitlyn's brother, or with another Stark or Tully cousin that might be negotiated. The Freys would be granted certain honors and allowances in the Riverlands for their loyalty. Supplies would be provided for the upkeep of the twins. A seat on the King's Council in the North might be offered to one of Lord Walder's capable sons, should they so desire. It was not everything Walder Frey had demanded privately, but it was a substantial offering. John watched the old man's face for a reaction. Lord Walder wore a mask of annoyance mixed with cunning interest. After a moment, he said, I see you're trying to sweeten the pot, but a pot sweetened by a broken vow can taste a bit bitter. What do you propose to do for my poor, jilted granddaughter? And the rest of the young maids who expected to see a queen among their ranks, only to be left as spinster. Robb hesitated. John spoke up, voice still calm. If they are in need of honorable matches, we can open lines of negotiation with other vassals of the North. Many young knights and heirs might be eager for alliances. House Manderley, House Glover, House Serwyn. We can see them well married if you so desire. Lord Walder's lips peeled back in something akin to a grin. So quick to promise, bastard. I do hope your king can keep these new vows better than his last. And you, would you marry a Frey yourself? John stood still, swallowing once. If that is what it takes for peace and alliance. I will do my duty to House Stark. He did not glance at Robb, but he could feel his brother's tension. Robb would never force him to marry for politics if there was any other way. But John had made his stance clear. He was not one to stand aside when the cause was so vital. Walder Frey cackled, tapping a thin cane on the floor. What a dutiful bastard you are. Perhaps I shall keep you in mind for one of my granddaughters, but I might not want a bastard for them. Then again, maybe you'll be legitimized one day, yes? The king in the North can do as he pleases, can't he? His gaze darted to Robb with sly malice. But let us not hurry. I want to see these new terms in writing. See them sealed and guaranteed by blood. Robb exhaled. I have scribes with me who will draft everything. If your scribes have a mind to help, we can finalize it soon. There was a long moment of charged silence. Walder Frey looked from Robb to John to the northern lords arrayed behind them. Eventually, he gave a curt nod. Very well. You shall have the hospitality of the twins for as long as it takes to come to a final arrangement. I won't have it said that Walder Frey does not show courtesy to his king. That last word was drenched in sarcasm. Robb inclined his head. Thank you, Lord Frey. With this, I hope we can put the past behind us. The war is far from over. We need each other if the North is to stand." Lord Walder sniffed. "Perhaps. You'll find I can be as loyal as I can be faithless, if well entreated." With that, he motioned for a younger Frey to escort them to rooms set aside in one of the towers. The tension in the hall didn't vanish, but at least they had avoided an immediate confrontation. The real test would come when the terms were finalized. If the old man thought he was not getting enough, he might well lock the gates or worse. John kept his eyes open as they were led through corridors of cold stone. He observed the number of Frey guards, the positions of arrow slits, the general layout. The twins might seem unimpressive to those accustomed to grander seats, but they were formidable in their own right. Armed men thronged every passage, and the design of the fortress bridge meant that any attacker would face a narrow choke point.